Percentage of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? Anybody want to answer that? Nobody wants to answer that. Scientifically, it's an easy question. 5 minutes on Google. 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen. Carbon dioxide is 0.04%. Of that, what percentage comes from man-made? Of that 0.04, anybody want to answer that? Google will tell you. It's around 11%. So 11% of 0.04% is produced by man-made, but that's what we're focused all of our attention on. That's what's caused global warming. That retention by that 0.04% of the carbon emissions that we are 11% of is what we're debating here. The hundreds of billions of dollars we want to put in to prevent that, and that's going to prevent global warming and cooling?
CO2 in the atmosphere is 0.04% of the atmosphere. That is true. And the argument basically is that, that's such a small percentage. Basically, why are we worried about that?
What is this? CO2 concentration.
Now, there are a couple of big problems with the argument that because it's a small concentration, it can't be important. So the first major objection is all greenhouse gases on the planet come to less than 1% of the atmosphere. And yet without those greenhouse gases, physics dictates that the planet would be completely frozen. So the entire greenhouse effect is dependent on a tiny percentage of the atmosphere, which automatically tells you that that tiny percentage of the atmosphere is actually very important. And actually, if you look at science in general, right, tiny quantities of things have big impacts all the time. If your blood was 0.04% cyanide, you'd have some pretty significant problems.
Do you know anyone with 0.04% cyanide in their bloodstreams? Maybe find those case studies if you're going to make conjectures about climate change.
Just because something is small doesn't mean it can't have a big impact. And actually, this fellow, I think his name is, Doug LaMalfa, must know this, because within the internal logic of his argument, he goes on to say,
if we get below 0.02, plant life starts dying off.
No, that is not entirely true.
It's false.
It's well known. If plants don't get enough carbon, they will die. Government trying to get to net zero carbon will kill plant life.
But by his own admission, small changes have massive impacts, in this case on life. So he knows that it has a big impact. He just disputes that it has a big impact on climate. And in fact, we know that it does apply to climate because we can measure it. This is something which just often flies under the radar in these discussions, but we can measure that CO2 is currently warming the planet's surface. And so a better way of thinking about this is not that we've increased the concentration of the atmosphere, the CO2 concentration of the atmosphere by 0.02%, or technically it's 0.012%. We've gone up from about 280 parts per million to 420 parts per million. So yes, that represents like a tiny fraction of the atmosphere, but it represents a 50% increase in CO2, which is very significant. Remember, without it, the planet would be frozen, and we've increased it 50%, taking global temperatures to their highest point in at least 100,000 years.
Wait. Climate change is caused by human activities? If this is the case, how did the Earth warm up without human intervention in the past? Weren't there 5 ice ages billions of years ago on Earth that melted all on its own? 'Cause let's face it, the Earth cools and warms up in cycles, with or without human activities.
I just recently watched say that it's the hottest month in 100,000 years, based on what scientific evidence. What reporting did we have around the world 100,000 years ago? I didn't see that Egyptian hieroglyphic. Did you? No answers. When I ask scientists all the time, no answers on how we are producing this climate change.